Welcome to another episode of the Mindset Recruiting Podcast. I'm Alex Rojas, your talent advisor and host. And in today's podcast episode, it's all about agency recruiters, the villains or the heroes. I mean, maybe a little bit of both. I'm going to give you 10 pros and cons when it comes to working with staffing firms. That's right. This is going to be a piggyback off of my last episode when I talked about staffing agency in the industry and what that looks like, the rise and the fall of the industry and totality of it. But we want to dig in to really what is it all about? How do you work with these staffing firms? And why is there such a stigma, a stench? Why is there such a reputation? Almost like as if they got COVID sometimes, especially if you're on the other side as a corporate recruiter having to work with agencies. So it's not all that bad. I'm not here to hate on staffing agencies. After all, that's where I got my background. That is my origin story. My origin story goes back into the mid 90s, and I got involved with Aerotech, which I think were the behemoths of staffing agencies. They know how to train and breed recruiters. And not only that, I did that for a year, but I also had my own staffing consulting firm for 3+ years in the Washington, D.C. area and had a very successful run. Throughout my career, I've worked with a lot of staffing agencies. I have colleagues that have their own firms and have been highly successful doing it. So I understand the war stories behind it. I've been on the inside in corporate America, and I've really put together some strategies when it comes to working with vendors, when it comes to staffing agencies. So I have the experience, I know the game, I know the excuses, I know the realities of it. I can sniff it all out. And if you stick around to the end of this episode, I'm going to share with you really a playbook on how you can put together a strategy, a collaboration effort in working with some of these agency recruiters and staffing firms that are out there. So here, let's go after it. These are the 10 pros and cons of working with staffing firms. Villain or hero? So kicking us off, number one, aggressive nature. That's right. That's a big con. The con here is that staffing agencies and firms are commission driven, and it's kind of got like a sweatshop reputation, right? It's banging out the phone calls, sending out all the emails. It's almost borderline stalking when we're talking about working in a staffing agency. And so when they come after you, they're very aggressive and very assertive. That can be a con. Now, the flip side of that, the pro is that they know how to target companies. They're good at what they do. Staffing agencies are well equipped when it comes to sales, account management, and developing recruiters. So they know how to target companies that actually have needs and need the support because they don't have the recruiting infrastructure or the resources and tools to get the job done. Number two is lack of transparency. That's right. This is a big con because staffing agencies have a good pulse on the marketplace. They are dealing with maybe your competitors out there. So, and most of the time, because they're recruiting candidates, candidates are actually getting recruited by other staffing agencies or other corporations. So there's really a lack of loyalty when it comes to this. They also don't have the particulars when it comes to job details, the salary, the compensation, the culture of the company. They don't have a good pulse when it comes to that. So there's not much transparency there. Now, again, the pro to this is what I had mentioned is that they have a good pulse on the marketplace because they're out there talking to candidates, talking to companies. They have a good understanding of what the needs and the supply and demand is for most of those companies. Number three, there is no personalization. That's right. The big con here is that they are volume centric. It's all about speed. It's all about the ability to close deals and get that spread. Spread means profit. That's how they determine whether or not they're having a good day, a bad week, or a great month. So they're very incentivized when it comes to that. Now, the pro behind this is actually staffing agencies have a very high sense of urgency. That's right. They are meeting multiple times a day. They get a lot of pressure. They get a lot of culture pressure within their staffing agency culture that if they don't fill these jobs, they're going to miss out. They're going to lose on it. And so there is a sense of urgency that's a lot different from corporate America recruiters. Number 4, high turnover rates. That's a big con here, because what happens is a lot of recruiters that are working in staffing agencies, the experience really depends. And so there's a lot of poor job matching skill sets that are being applied to this. Most candidates that are typically going into the agency route, it's kind of sometimes their last resort. They're desperate for their next job. They want a full-time position. So they're thinking about, hey, I can take this contract or attempt to perm and work myself to a full-time opportunity. Now, don't get me wrong. There are contractors that work for staffing agencies and that's all they love to do. But a large percentage of them, they want to get full-time status with those companies, with those clients. The pro is that if you lose somebody in a turnover, the staffing agencies, they're willing to work hard to backfill that position. And sometimes that can be really a big advantage for you as a company. Okay, number 5 on this list, the quantity versus quality. This is a big deal here. The con is that for the most part, staffing agencies, they have to work on making sure that they're funneling the quantity. They're going to focus, obviously they're going to identify big quality candidates that are out there, but it's a lot of times it's mismatching here. It's a numbers game for them. And this goes back to the volume centric type of environment here. The pro is that they have more bandwidth to dedicate and to support for your position needs. And so a lot of times, especially if you're a small, mid-sized company or even a corporation, you're one recruiter, you're managing 30, 40, 50 maybe requisitions at one time. You just don't have the bandwidth. And that's where the extension of having a staffing agency to have that quantity of pipeline is essential there. Number 6, expensive terms. This is a big con when it comes to perm placements for staffing agencies. It can range as high as 30-35% of the salary or the total compensation package. Whenever you're dealing with staffing agency firms that are more small mom and pop boutique firms, believe it or not, those 35% goes down to the average, which is about 20-25%. But then you have those firms that can even go down to 15-10%. And they're undercutting the competitors there when it comes to that. Payment terms can sometimes be a pain. It takes a while to collect. And so they want to make sure that they get their payment on that. There's also conversion fees for contract to hire type of situations. Another thing that you run into when dealing with staffing agencies is that they're lowballing their candidates. So they're trying to create as much spread profit as possible whenever they try to close a deal. So that might mean that's at a disadvantage for the candidate. And then there's a duration of the contract. They're trying to string out as much as they possibly can, which can be expensive for you. Now, the pros behind all of this is there's a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of negotiation. Staffing agencies are known to negotiate. That's why they come across as salesy and kind of like car salesmen at times. But they're willing to offer a lot of flexibility when it comes to the rates, the conversion fees. And so you need to be comfortable with engaging with them when it comes to that. Number 7, there's limited vetting. That's a big con here. They don't have enough time to do background checks on candidates, or for that matter, on the clients. It goes both ways, right? You may go ahead. Sometimes there's a level of desperation for staffing agencies to get new business opportunities. And so they may take a client that really they shouldn't be taken. And so the vetting process is minimal, and that's going to translate over to the candidate experience as well. So the pro behind that is that they're willing to work with companies or candidates that maybe have poor reputation, right? So maybe they just don't have enough time to really vet the company and the candidate. And so they're not able to really probe and reveal, some of these nuances that might come into play when it comes to companies. And so they're willing to go to bat for a poor run company, essentially, or maybe there's there's a candidate that has a tarnished image and they're willing to go ahead and, you've heard this saying, square peg, round hole type of situation. Number 8, fierce competition. That's right. Everyone is competing for the same amount of candidates, the caliber of candidates. They're trying to get the client's attention. And because there's so much competition, which could be a healthy thing, they may have a candidate and they might have 2 or 3 possible opportunities that they're presenting to that candidate because they have competitors there. And so you as a company may not get that preferential treatment for that top A candidate. Maybe they slide in a B tier or C tier candidate over to you. Now, the pros behind this is that when it comes to competition, the reputable staffing firms are going to rise to the top. And so they have established, they have infrastructure, they know how to develop long-term relationships with companies. That's why they get on the preferred vendor list, right? So it's going to really separate themselves from some of the stragglers, some of the companies that are trying to get their foot in the door to work with big firms and things like that. Number 9, lack of resources. This is a big deal here. And so a lot of times, if you're working with these staffing agencies, you might have to do a quality control check with them and ask them, what type of tools, what type of resources do you have? What kind of bandwidth, right? How many recruiters do you have dedicated to this? They always give you the same thing. It's always the same tools. They have their own database and, they have limited recruiters. They might tell you they got 5 or 6 recruiters, but they may be working on 50, 100 different recs, prioritizing them differently throughout the day. Now, the pros behind having lack of resources is that they know their tools. They're really good at this, where a lot of corporate recruiters really don't have the time to do that because they're servicing their hiring managers and dealing with corporate politics. And so that becomes essential too. So they have access to much a larger database. And so for them, it's about repetition and developing that rapport that are candidates that will be ready. It's one of those things where I remember I used to have about 7, 8, 9, 10 candidates ready in my back pocket. And as soon as that call or that staffing need came in, back pocket, let me call that candidate, ready to go. I don't have to do any qualifying, no screening. My cycles are really minimized on that standpoint. And then finally, the 10th, when we come to the last one, the 10th pro and con here is inexperience. That's right. Recruiters usually working in staffing agencies, that's their foot in the door opportunity to work for a firm. And so they just don't have the tenure, the experience. And so they don't really know corporate America. They only know one side of recruiting, and that is the hustle and bustle of staffing agencies. And so you really miss out on that being well-rounded recruiter. Now, the pro behind this is that they know how to develop raw and gritty recruiters. I mean, this is why they have kind of that boot camp mentality. They know how to grind. This is where the thick skin, sink or swim, swim against the current, kind of being resilient. They are good hunters. And those recruiters that are able to stick out that agency environment where there's a high volume and a good reputation, if they can last, they will be successful and can overcome the inexperience. So what did you learn in this episode? Did you identify with a villain or the heroes, or maybe a little bit of both? I mean, a lot of times when you start to engage staffing firms or agency recruiters, they may start off as a hero and then they plummet and become the villain. And I've seen that happen so many times too. Or maybe they start off as a villain and they eventually become the hero because they know your business. And I think that's the most important thing here is to understand is that this industry is not going away. The staffing agency industry is a $500 billion industry. They are making money. They know how to make money. There is a need for staffing firms and agency recruiters. What's really important is to know how to work with them, how to vet them out properly and hold them accountable. And that's going to be really important. You have to spend just as much time as they spend with you in really understanding their infrastructure, their resources, their tools, their business model, where you lie in the prioritization of how they tackle their day-to-day need. Now, a seasoned recruiter will know how to vet them out and manage them. A lot of times when staffing firms get a hold of a hiring manager, they're done. Hiring managers don't know how to deal with them. I mean, it's like them going into the car sales shop, and they're dealing with the sales manager, dealing at an auto dealership. And so what's really important here is that if your firm, your company decides to engage with a staffing agency, putting together a robust staffing strategy when it comes to vendors is important. The contract, the terms, the agreements, the SLAs, all of that matters. But if you do it properly and you set the framework, staffing firms and agencies can actually be an extension to your TA organization. And if you have, whether it's a handful, 10, 20 staffing vendors that are working, depending on the size of your company, again, there's a big difference between a small, mid-sized company that has vendors as far as staffing agencies and a company that's enterprise, that's in the billions of dollars and has a robust staffing model there. So I hope this episode was informative. Please like, subscribe, comment, share. It helps the podcast grow. And remember, until next time, it's all about the mindset.